Hello. We're going to be working on the homework for skill 1 today, which is all about practicing finalizing our patterns. Okay, so a few things you're going to need. You're going to want your half scale slopers, some soft pattern paper. You want a clear gridded ruler, scissors, notcher, awl or hole punch, pencil, black pen, red pen. And you're going to want your worksheets that go along with skill 1. Let's get started. Before we begin, I want to make sure that you got your half scale slopers cut out and kind of finished the way that I want them to be. So you're going to cut them all out. There are a few, such as the torsos and the pants, that you're gonna have to like tape the two pieces together just because they're too big. They don't fit on one piece of paper. But I want you to go around and really for today, we're only gonna be working with the front and the back bodice, the sleeve, and the 2 skirts. So you can put everything else off to the side. But just to show you how you should have your half scale slopers, very, very carefully cut along the line and be precise, okay? Because you're going to be using these the rest of the semester and you can only be as accurate as your first cut was, okay? So everywhere you see one of the little T notches along the edge of your pattern piece, such as here and at the ends of your dart legs, I want you to use your notching tool and cut a notch. The notches on the dart legs should be in line with the dart legs. The notches anywhere else along the edge of the pattern piece should be perpendicular to the edge of the pattern piece, okay? So go around, get all your notches cut, all of them, on all your half scale pieces. Then you want to look, and everywhere that you have a red circle, you want to, that's a punch hole, and you want to use your punch hole tool and punch a little hole into your pattern piece, or you can use your awl and just shove it into your pattern piece to make a hole, okay? Either one, whichever one you prefer. So get that done on all of your pattern pieces. Now for this skill 1 homework, all we're gonna need is our front bodice, our back bodice, our front skirt, our back skirt, and our sleeve, okay? So for your homework for skill 1, you're gonna be finalizing these into finished production ready patterns, okay? That means we need to go in, trace around them, add our seam allowances, and then go in and add all of our markings and notches appropriately, okay? So this sheet that I've given you with skill 1 has a ton of really useful information. Anytime throughout the course of the semester that you are going to finalize pattern pieces, this is a really great kind of tool or resource to use, okay? So it talks about our standard seam allowances for different areas on our pattern pieces. Now, we're working on our half scale, so I also gave the standard half scale seam allowances. All it is it's just half of what our full scale is. I talk about adding seam allowances to straight edges, and then I talk about adding seam allowances to curved edges. And then these are things that you want to keep in mind for finalizing patterns. These are possibly slightly different than how the markings would be on our slopers. And so I want you to start recognizing that the way we mark our slopers, like mark the dart points and such, is slightly different than how we do it on our finalized versions, okay? So make sure you read through this whole thing. To start off with, we're just going to get a big enough piece of paper that you can fit all of your pattern pieces on it. And I want you to definitely leave at least an inch or 2 around all sides of your pieces. I'm gonna go in and tape these down. Now you can tape them down, you can use weights, whatever your preference is. but we just really want to make sure that they are held in one spot and aren't twisting around on us as we're tracing around them. All right, first step when we're going to finalize our patterns, let's say we've, normally we would do a lot of pattern manipulations and then we would go into finalizing our patterns. But here we're just wanting to check and test the fit of our slopers. So we're skipping the pattern manipulation step. So first thing you do to get to a finalized pattern is to trace around your sloper or your working pattern. And I want you to do this very accurately. You can lose a lot of precision in this step, and that will mess up your pattern for the rest of the process. So what I want you to do is I want you to follow along with your fingertips, and wherever you are tracing around your pattern piece, I want your fingertips not far behind, following along and holding the edge of your pattern piece down, okay? And you're making sure that your pattern, if you taped it down, that it's staying held in place. And if you just use weights, you're making sure that it's not shifting around on you. But you'll see that I am marking exactly along the edge, and I'm using my fingertips to smooth out the pattern piece so that I know I'm getting right on the edge, okay? I'm also gonna go and mark my bust apex and my dart point, okay? And you'll notice that I marked my notches all along the way. So go ahead and do that with all the rest of your pieces. Okay, after you've traced around all of this, there are a few key places that I want you to pay attention to. So most of the time, our grain line is going to be parallel with center front or center back. So those are easy. We can just line our ruler up with the edge, with the center line to draw in our grain line. But on our sleeve, our grain line is kind of just randomly in the middle. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your awl and I want you to poke it through, be very accurate, the top, the bottom, and the middle of your grain line. I want you to poke it through so you're creating a hole in the paper behind so that you'll be able to fill in your grain line later and it will be accurate, okay? All right, so let's start with our front and our back bodice slopers. I am going to take my pieces off very carefully so I can see my tracing underneath. If you taped them down, you may have to fill in the edges where there was tape. All right, so I like to help keep my bearings. When I first take my pieces off, the first thing I like to do is to mark my centers, okay? So I'm gonna write CF at the top and the bottom of center front. And I wanna do it so the letters are resting on the center line. And then I'm gonna also do it for center back, okay? I know that my grain lines are parallel to center front and center back. I'm gonna go ahead and fill those in. I'm lining one of the lines on my ruler up with the center line on my pattern. I'm just gonna give myself a nice long grain line that is most of the length of my pattern piece. Now, our front skirt and our front bodice, I don't want there to be a seam down the front of it, and so I'm gonna make it so those are cut on the fold, which is just, we kind of point our arrow towards that center front, okay? For center back, I'm just gonna do a straight grain parallel with center. And you can write grain line on those if you'd like. The next thing I like to do to keep my bearings is I like to find my dart points and my dart legs, and I like to draw in my dart legs, okay? So remember, hold your pencil right on the dart point and scoot your ruler up to it. Pivot, okay? Okay, now we have our dart legs filled in. This is where I want you to come down to this bottom part where it says below are a few things to keep in mind for finalizing patterns. Your dart punch holes are backed off from your dart points by 1 inch. Now everything in here is for a full-size pattern. So for half scale, we're gonna back off our dart points 1 inch. What do I mean by this? So on our slopers, we always put a punch hole right at the end of the dart point, and that's just because all we're doing with our slopers is we're tracing them off. So we want to be able to easily find that location and then the ends of our dart legs so we can draw our dart legs in accurately. But once we're working on finalized patterns, the point of the punch hole is to tell whoever is sewing it how far they need to sew. And normally they'll use a drill in manufacturing when they're cutting. They'll actually drill a hole through the fabric. And so on full scale patterns, the sewers know to go and sew 1 inch past that punch hole. So then the punch hole will be hidden and there won't actually be a hole in the garment, okay? So that is the reason why on finalized pattern pieces, we back that punch hole off from the dart point. On full scale patterns, it's gonna be 1 inch. For half scale, we're gonna do 1/2 inch. So what I want you to do is this is where you get your red pen out. So for marking our punch holes on our finalized pattern pieces, you are going to line up the 1/2 inch line with your dart point. And you're gonna find halfway between the two dart legs, okay? And you're gonna put a little dot. Little dot there, and you're gonna circle it, okay? That's your punch hole. Again, you're gonna find the 1/2 inch line on your ruler, line it up with your dart point, and then find right in between your two dart legs and put a little dot. And circle it. Same with your last one. 1/2 inch right in between your dart legs. Put a little dot and circle it, okay? And then what you can do is take your punch hole and actually punch a hole right on that dot, okay? So for finalized pattern pieces, this little dot that we have here is our bust apex. Sometimes that is present on finalized pattern pieces, sometimes it's not. It kind of depends on what the pattern is going to be used for. You can go ahead and mark it if you would like. It definitely helps if you're in the preliminary stages where you're still testing the fit of things. Definitely helps to have the bust apex marked. So go ahead and do that. You can just circle it and punch hole it, but I would definitely label it. Since it's not like a dart point or anything, I would definitely label it apex, okay? So now we've got our centers marked, we've got our grain lines in, we've got our kind of darts dealt with. The next thing we're gonna go do is to add some seam allowances, okay? So if you get this paper out, there's a lot of information right here that you need to read about adding seam allowances. Whenever you have a straight edge on a pattern piece, what you can do is just line it up with one of the lines on your ruler and draw it in straight, okay? So let's look at this. Necklines and faced edges typically have a smaller seam allowance. Shoulder seams, side seams, armholes, style lines, those are typically always 1/2 inch at full scale. Hems and center lines are gonna have 1 inch standard seam allowances. There are certain situations where you would stray from this, but when in doubt, just use that, okay? But also remember, we're working at the 1/2 scale, so kind of reference these numbers while you're working at the 1/2 scale. So I'm gonna start right here on my side seam. For 1/2 scale, our side seam is gonna be 1/4 inch. So I'm going to line up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with the side seam and just draw it in. And I always go a little bit past the corners of the pattern piece. Shoulder seam is the same, 1/4 inch seam allowance. So line up that 1/4 inch line, give yourself a nice straight edge. Now we're working on our curved edges next. Our neckline is only going, or let's do our armhole first. So armhole, we're gonna have a 1/4 inch seam allowance again. So what I want you to do is I want you to take and grab your ruler like this. This is how you can add seam allowances for any curved edge pretty easily, okay? So I want you to grab it like this and have your finger so you can press down and kind of get accuracy and go around the curve. But the rest of your fingers are helping you move your ruler around the curve quickly, okay? So I am going to line up just one little area of my curve with my 1/4 inch line, and I'm going to give myself a mark here. I'm gonna move it a little bit and give myself another mark. And you're following the curve all the way around. And essentially what you're gonna end up with is a dotted line that goes around your curve. Okay, and then we can go in and fill that in. I usually do that at the end once I get all of my dotted line filled in, okay? So now let's go down to the waist here, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna follow this curve. The sharper the curve, the tinier your dotted line is going to need to be. And kind of the smoother the curve, the longer your dotted lines can be. Now our neckline, we are gonna have, the neckline is kind of like a raw edge. So normally if I were creating a finalized pattern for this, I would have some sort of a facing around the neck. So that means that would be a faced edge, which means I'm gonna do 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, center front, this is cut on the fold. I do not want there to be a seam there, which means I do not add seam allowance. So you're just gonna take this and you're going to extend your center line up and down until it touches where your seam allowances are. So we have effectively added seam allowance all the way around our pattern piece. The next thing I would do is go in with a French curve, and I would sort of use it to help me fill in that dotted line. One thing I want you to recognize that while I'm using this French curve, I hope you recognize that I was just kind of flinging it around and trying it out all different ways. Sometimes you can't get a full curve in with this, so you might have to, trace half of your curve and then move the French curve around and get the other half. This is a more ideal size for full scale patterns. You don't have to do that as much on full scale, but half scale, you really have to play around with it. So please know that whenever you're using a French curve, like move it around and really find the ideal curve to get accuracy with your pattern. So once we have our seam allowances on here, the next thing that we need to do is to transfer our notches that are at the ends of our dart legs and like at our armhole and our shoulder line. We need to transfer those out to the edges of our seam allowances because again, notches are only along the edge of the pattern pieces. So one way you can do that is on straight edges, I like to line this stitch line up with the line on my ruler, and then I just transfer the notch straight out to the edge. On curved edges, you can kind of do the same thing. You just want to make sure you're really transferring it accurately. With dart legs, you can just kind of line your ruler up with the dart leg and just transfer it out to the edge, okay? I'd like you to go and do that to all the rest of your pattern pieces where you take your slopers off, you transfer all of your markings for your darts, your centers, your grain lines, then go in and add seam allowances, transfer your notches out to the edge, and I'll meet you back here. I got in a hurry. I circled the dart points in red. Don't be like me. Remember that on finalized pattern pieces, you have to do the punch hole backed off from your dart point, okay? So on half scales, we're gonna do 1/2 inch. All right, you got all your pieces traced, you add your seam allowances, you got your punch holes and markings for your darts, centers are marked, grain lines are marked, everything is labeled, notches are moved out to the edge of the pattern piece. I want you to go in and actually notch them out with the notcher. Then you can go and use the punch hole and punch through all your pattern pieces. Make sure when you're punching, you're not punching through anything super important like any of your markings or your labels. So if needed, you can do it at the bottom. Just try to find kind of a free space. And I like to try hanging them, like before you punch through it, you can pinch it between your fingers like this and let it hang. Make sure you're not, punching through it where it's gonna hang all wonky. You kind of want all your pattern pieces to hang down nicely together, okay? So once you got them punch holed, you can use a little pattern hook like so. And that is how, when you finalize your pattern pieces, you are going to present all of them to me throughout the semester. Now, once you get your finalized piece, all your finalized pattern pieces finished and hung on here, I want you to go a step further and we're gonna fill out a pattern card. And this is gonna be really good practice for you because I'm gonna ask for these all throughout the semester. What a pattern card is it's pretty much for the person who's gonna come after you and maybe cut it out or sew it. It just tells a lot of information. It labels all of the pattern pieces and how many you cut. It has a front and a back sketch and any additional notions that you might need for it. So this is super handy for anyone who's coming after you to make a prototype or a sample or whatever. So I'm gonna call this my sloper dress. You could also call it your basic pattern set dress. It doesn't really matter. You can give it a crazy name if you want. I'm gonna go through and label, you put the name of the pattern pieces here and how many you cut in this section. I try to be organized about this, and I try to start from the top and go down. So I'm going to say front bodice, back bodice, sleeve, front skirt, okay, front bodice is cut 1 on fold. OF I use for on fold. Back is cut 2, sleeve, cut 2, front skirt, cut 1 on fold, back, cut 2. Okay, so our front sketch is going to look something like this. When you are doing this, don't just do it the way I'm doing it. Actually utilize a croquis behind it so you get more accuracy. I'm just trying to do this quickly to show you what I would do. There is a center back seam all the way down. We still have our waist starts, and the waist starts on the skirt, the centermost waist starts on the skirt, are in line with the waist starts on the bodice. Make sure you reflect that in your sketch. There are also shoulder darts on the back. When you do your sleeve, there are also elbow darts. Do not forget that. The skirt falls down nice and straight, so reflect that in your sketch as well. Notions, I would recommend there be, let's pretend like if we were to actually turn this into a dress, that we would put in a 22-inch invisible zipper. Okay, so that's sort of how you fill out a pattern card. In reality, I would need some sort of a waist or a neckline facing for this. I could even write in my notions that I need 25 inches of bias tape. If I didn't have pattern pieces for a neck facing, I would need some way to finish the neckline, so I could finish it using bias tape. But that's how you fill out a pattern card. You want your sketches to be a little bit more legit than what I did here. I was just trying to do it quickly to show you. Always give your style or your garment a name. Have all of your pattern pieces, have them labeled exactly how they are on the pieces, and then note how many you cut, okay? If I were to have pattern pieces that were cut out of interfacing, I usually have like all this fabric pieces that I cut grouped together. If I had any interfacing, I would label it down here. And then if I had maybe some lining or some contrasting fabric, I would label them all I would kind of group them separately. So whoever comes to cut it has an easier way of organizing how they're cutting it out. So when you want to hand something like this in, you would also just punch hole it, hang it with your pattern pieces on a pattern hook, and that's how you would turn stuff in for the remainder of the semester. So good job doing your homework for skill 1, and make sure if you have any questions about any of this, please ask me to clarify, because this is what you're going to be doing the rest of the semester, kind of on your own after we work together on stuff in class. So I want to make sure you understand like the how and the why behind finalizing all of your pattern pieces. Good job.